thought that I would tell you guys all what I have been doing for the past 3 months in isolation and give you a little garden tour of 97 Middle Haddam Road here in Middle Haddam, Connecticut. We are standing in front of the house that I bought 2 years ago. It's called the Laura Hurd House. It was built in 1823 by a shipbuilder who lives kitty corner from here, who lived here with her husband and 6 kids, as well as the local doctor, his wife, and their 4 kids. So it was a pretty crowded house, and there's a lot of space for me living here by myself. So we're not going to go inside today because I'm still renovating the place and it's not quite perfect. But I have been spending a ton of time on the gardens. And so I wanted to show you guys some of the beautiful flowers that I've planted and tell you a little bit about my plans for the property and things that I've learned and things that I've done wrong. So, let's walk. Okay, so I thought we would begin the tour by starting with the parts of the garden that I'm the least responsible for and probably the least proud of, and then we would talk about the things that I really kind of put my heart and soul into. So I kind of got interested in gardening because my mom and I went to Paris 2 years ago, and we went to Monet's garden in what for 30 years I was pronouncing as Giverny, but in fact is Giverny, and it was absolutely spectacular. And I just couldn't believe it, and I bought a book of plants, and my parents, or my mom was like, what are you gonna do with that? You've never planted a thing in your life. And that's true, but it sort of set the seed, so to speak, for thinking to myself, I would love to have this gorgeous, lush garden. Anyway, when I moved in here, all the outsides of the house were overgrown with enormous shrubs. And I hired somebody to come in and trim them, and within a month, they were back to the enormous size. So that really didn't work. But I had no idea what shrubs I wanted, what a shrub really even was, what possibilities there were. So I hired a landscaping company, and I said, landscape the front of the house and landscape the side of the house. Just make it simple. I'm in New York a lot of the time. I don't want to deal with it. And so what they put in was knockout roses, which are foolproof. They don't get disease. You don't have to deadhead them. They bloom all summer. You don't even really need to fertilize them or water them once they're established. They put in endless summer hydrangeas, which are supposed to bloom on new wood or old wood, so it doesn't matter if you don't prune them. It doesn't matter if they have a horrible winter. And then they put in some lyrope, which I'm actually okay with. So now, as a garden expert, I realize that knockout roses are like, it's like the McDonald's of roses, like yucky. So I'm actually gonna pull these McDonald's roses out at the end of this season, and I'm gonna give them to my mother, who has no problem with McDonald's roses. Endless summer hydrangeas, same thing, basically the Burger King of hydrangeas. They don't work, they don't bloom. These ones look particularly, they're green, but they're all curled over, and I don't know if that's because of the painters or because of something I did, but I have this one, and there's one over there, the only 2 that I have left in their original place. I originally had, I think, 12 of them. I've taken out the other 10, and I've moved them. When we get to the rest of the garden, I'll show you. I've moved them all to places in the back where you can't really see them because they're just not a great hydrangea. Now, here may be my first true moment where I was like, I'm gonna plant something. And it was not a success, but that's okay. This is a tree peony. Now, peonies are absolutely gorgeous flowers, and I'm gonna show you a lot of them when we get to the other side of the garden. This is a tree peony, which is a little bit different. It does not die back to the ground. It's gonna keep this shape. And I bought it sometimes when you have a tree peony, if you were to plant it, it can take 6 years for it to do a single bloom. And I am very impatient. I have grown up on Amazon and I want instant gratification. So I found a peony nursery out in Litchfield, Connecticut that sells peony trees that are already 10 years old. So you can just pay $200 and they will send you a 10-year-old plant. So I was like, that's worth it. Then I'll get a peony this summer. So I planted it here, which I thought was the right place for it, and it clearly was not, because even though it did bloom, it's past right now, but maybe my videographer can put in some still shots that I took on my phone of the blooms. You can see that the plant is not healthy or happy. It just looks a little sad. So I'm gonna have to move it. That's fine. Now we come around to something that I have spent a ton of time on this summer. So soon after COVID began, it turned out that my entire, I guess underneath this house were these old clay sewer pipes, literally made of clay, probably put in around 1910 or 1915. And they had cracked. And for 2 years, I have been having issues with my, for lack of a better word, toilets, where they just wouldn't flush. So I thought, well, I'm gonna be here now for 3 months in a row. I really need to fix this. So some very nice men came out, they identified the problem, and they told me, everything needs to be dug up. We're gonna build a trench. And I was like, what? I just landscaped this last year. You can't dig it all up. And they said, well, that's what's gonna happen. I spent the weekend before taking out all the plants because I didn't trust them and packaging them up and watering them and being super careful. And then when they were done with that project, I decided to re-landscape it myself. Take out all the plants that the landscapers had put in that I thought were ugly, and now that I was smart and knew something about plants, and I was gonna pick colors that I loved. So as you can probably see, the color theme here is deep pink / purple, almost a fuchsia, to match the doors of the house. So this here, I have 2 of them. This is a wine and roses regalia. It's made by Proven Winners, and it's a really old-fashioned plant. It's been around forever. It's only gonna bloom in summer, or like around this time, and then it's not gonna rebloom. My sister-in-law just bought some regalias that are ever blooming, meaning they're gonna bloom all summer. So there's a possibility that I'm gonna dig these out at the end of this season and put in what she just put in, because I'm jealous of I think she made the better choice. So that's fine, that's how gardens go. We have some boxwoods here that when they get a little bit larger, I'm going to trim them into like a really pretty, sort of domed shape, the way that you think of like a classic boxwood in like a European garden or like a fancy garden. And I think that will look lovely. Another Woodjalia. And in here is an example of where I took out a lot of the endless summer hydrangeas. I had a bunch of them in here. I took them all out and I replaced them with a kind of hydrangea known as a smooth hydrangea. And you can see, unlike the endless summers, these already have blooms all over them. So I suspect by the end of June, I will have beautiful flowers. I have 3 of them here, 1 of them here, same thing on the other side. And what's really nice about smooth hydrangeas, unlike the endless summers, is that they're native to the United States versus being from Asia. And it doesn't matter how bad the winter is. You could get 50 inches of snow. It doesn't make any difference because you cut them down all the way to the ground and then they bloom up every year new. And so you don't have to worry about pruning or old wood or new wood. Slash them all the way back and they're gonna come back perfectly. I have some old smooth hydrangeas that were in the garden when I moved in, and they are absolutely spectacular, which is how I knew that they were maybe the right way to go as opposed to the mistakes I made last summer. This here is a polar night rhododendron. I picked it so that it would match the door colors, and it's eventually going to be 4 feet wide and about 3 feet high. And so the hope is that, give it a couple years, there will really be like a spectacular sort of purple fuchsia show for everybody to see when they're driving by, which should hopefully match and everything will coordinate. For those of you who have particularly sharp eyes, you may notice that I have an American flag in back of me, but it is not the American flag that you're used to. This is the 1822 American flag. It's the one that would have been in use when this house was built. And so I was inspired by some homes in Essex, Connecticut that have the like old Betsy Ross flag with the circle stars. Mine is not quite as cute because it kind of just looks like the normal American flag, except that the stars, there's not as many of them. My parents got me this, and I specifically asked for a canvas one because I think they look a little classier, but they couldn't find a canvas in the 1822 flag because there's not a lot of demand for the 1822 flag. And the second is that my mother's experience has been that that if you buy the beautiful canvas flags, they are completely faded within a year. They're 4 times as expensive, and you're going to end up replacing them. So nylon it is, even if it's not historically accurate. I have some beautiful hostas, which I feel like a middle-aged woman in a lot of ways, but I really feel middle-aged because hostas have become one of my favorite flowers or favorite plants. I just think I've got a ton of them in the backyard. I just think they're amazing. They don't bloom. They're just there for their foliage. And I think at some point I'm actually going to plant an entire hosta garden that just has tons of different ones in tons of different colors because I just think they're so spectacular. We have some barberry, which is nothing to look at. That was part of what the landscapers put in last year. It's very expensive to replace all these plants, plus I paid a lot of money last year for them, and they were kind of the right color scheme. So for now, they stay. And this is my gorgeous porch, which is probably the reason I bought the house. Right now, I'm not going to give you too much of a close-up because it's being painted in the process, so it's a bit of a mess here, but perhaps in the next video. So these steps are really important to my house looking great, and as you can tell, I spend a lot of time finding plants that are going to go with my color theme. So this year, like I said, we're going with fuchsias. I absolutely fell in love with these mini dahlias. They're called dahliettas, and they're always going to stay this size. They're not going to get huge like the dinner plate dahlias that you may be familiar with. Unlike a lot of plants that you put into pots, these don't spread. So you really do need to pack your pot really tightly if you want it to look flush. So for example, here is one where I didn't follow my own advice. I only put 2 plants in, and they've been in here for a month, and they're looking no bigger. So I probably should add a few more in. I also have these geraniums, which look like no geraniums that I had ever seen before, and I think they're really pretty and really neat. And then down here, we have yet another geranium. Again, quite different than your classic geranium that your mom or your grandmother probably put in her window boxes. So that's my front porch. I love to do things here. At fall, I have absolutely amazing hay barrels and little scarecrows here and pumpkins and mums, and it was gorgeous. And at Christmas, I had really festive wreaths and everything going up here. So in general, like these steps in this porch is one of my favorite things about the house and something I really look forward to decorating all the time. Okay, so now we're gonna go around the back and I'm gonna show you the real highlights of the garden. well, this is only going to take a minute, but I just wanted to show you guys the pots. I planted this exact same pot all over my patio because I just wanted it to look uniform throughout. It's really simple. We've got one classic geranium in violet, which you're going to see is then mimicked in the larger garden. I have something called, let's see if I remember it. I brought out some cards that I can never remember the name of. And look, this is the first one. Snowstorm Blue. It's a Sutera cordata by Proven Winners. I don't actually know like what that means, but it's an annual and it's supposed to eventually spill out. These are Supertunia Royal Velvet. If you haven't planted Supertunias, you're gonna see that I have gone a little bit crazy with them this year, and they get enormous. This is only one plant, and when it started, it was, you know, probably the size of the palm of my hand. That was 3 weeks ago, and now it's already this big. I suspect by the end of the summer, it's gonna be cascading over the edge. So a really inexpensive pot to put together, and I think it looks really pretty and vibrant. You can see the bright pinks even from down the lawn. And I also like that they're all the same throughout the patio because it kind of adds a little bit of elegance to have everything uniform. So when I first moved into this house, these flower borders, and we're going to show you a long shot of all of them, were already here. But they were filled with weeds and plants that I didn't recognize, and then when they ended up growing in, I realized they were even more weeds. And so last year I did a little bit of just weeding things out to make room for new stuff, but I didn't really know what I should plant. And so I spent a lot of last year, sort of like a hobby, researching sort of classic gardens from the old-fashioned classic gardens. So basically from around the turn of the century, when people used flowers, not just like boxwoods, but not necessarily, you know, with all the modern trappings of really, I guess, of modern landscaping. So one of the things that I learned was that these kind of borders, as they're called, perennial borders, were incredibly hip around the turn of the century. And the idea was you wanted to create sort of an English cottage style, and a lot of the major designers in America focused on pale, sort of cool colors. Pinks, purples, whites, soft yellows. And so I wanted to do the same. It also helps that I happen to love those colors. And so I have planted, and the other, I guess I should also make clear, the other challenge with a perennial border is not just making sure that you have colors that you like, but you need to make sure that the perennials are staggered, because a perennial, unlike an annual, doesn't bloom from when you plant it in May all the way until the frost in October. It's only going to live for a month at some point during that growing season. And so you need to have something that's in bloom in May, or really ideally April, June, then July, then August, then September, and maybe even all the way into October, since it really doesn't even get cold anymore. So I'm not sure that I have nailed this at all, but I am optimistic that I have made some efforts, and as this summer progresses, when I see holes, when I see that nothing is in bloom, that's when I'm going to run out to the store and find some more stuff that fits this color scheme and that is in bloom. And I'm hoping by the end of the summer, I will really have a garden that is exactly as it should be. So let me just tell you a little bit about what I picked. I have throughout this garden tons of these purple flowers. They're called bearded irises. They were actually here, and I think they're gorgeous, and so I left them. I have planted myself a lot of lupines. They're lupins, but I call them lupines because I have been obsessed with lupines ever since I was 5 years old, and I read that children's book, Miss Rumphius, where she goes around Maine and she makes it more beautiful by spreading lupine seeds. And if you've ever been to Maine, you know that wild lupines grow crazy all over all the highways, and it's just absolutely gorgeous around this time of year. So I knew I wanted to add lupines or lupines to this garden. And so I put in a few of them. This one is dying, this one's coming up, but I was so proud of this one because it was so tall that I wanted to leave it in. And I will ask my trusty videographer to put in a still of what it looked like a week ago when it was in beautiful bloom. I also have in here, these are, I don't know if you can see them, these are called bellflowers or campanulas, and these are actually getting a little bit past. In April, these were gorgeous, and they were some of the only color. And so, again, the idea is to have sort of a staggered look. So that was something I had in April. These little purple guys are Browalias. They're annuals. I just popped them in for some color. But they're one of the few annuals that like shade. And so, even though right now it's sunny because the sun is directly overhead, by around 11, these holly bushes end up shading that. And so they're quite happy there. That there are a lot of options in perennials for what you want at the front of the border, and I just am not quite ready to decide what I want. I'm still learning a lot about how tall plants get and how long they last, and since the front of the border is so important, I want to get that right. And so putting in annuals just keeps some color and make sure that I don't have to make any big decisions this year. So these are Charm Supertunia Charms in white. And again, they grow from a little 4-inch can, and they're going to just keep spreading. They've only been in the ground for 2 weeks, and they're already 4 times the size that they were. So a really good use of $5, which is nice. I also planted, there's 2 of them, but you could probably see this one better. This is a Coral Charm Rose, and it's by Easy Elegance. That's the brand. And I planted them bare root, meaning they had no leaves on them. They were nothing but a little stick and then some roots. And I was a little nervous to do that because that feels like real rose planting that an actual person who knows what they're doing would do. But I'm happy to say that they are flushing out. I don't have any blooms yet, but it's still very early. Rose season is really like mid-June through, I guess, through the rest of the summer, although I do have some roses in bloom, which I'm going to show you. And of course, the first year of any plant is a little iffy. But I'm happy to say that they have survived the hardest part, which was, could they actually leaf out? So that's great. This is Summer Phlox. This will hopefully be, when some of this spring color, the lupins and the bearded irises, when those are gone, these will come up. And I believe that these are hot pink. That's what I remember from last year, and these were originally here. So they should be really fun and spectacular. The annuals will be here all season. To go a little bit farther, back here, so I was reading and I watched this YouTube channel, and they were describing how a perfect garden bed has 4 colors. It has green, it has red, it has blue, and it has yellow. So I have plenty of green. I have some blue because I have a lot of purple. I don't like yellow in terms of what they mean by that is a chartreuse, sort of a yellow foliage. I don't like that color, and so that rule is not going to apply in my garden. What I didn't have was anything with any red foliage, and so I put in, these are called penstemon, which I've never seen this before in any garden that I'm familiar with, which is basically no garden since this is my first year gardening. But I think they're really pretty. I have one, they have these really delicate flowers. These are purple, and this one is called Bluebeard penstemon. And this one has little white flowers. It's called Onyx and Pearl. So they're actually, even though right now they just look like little sticks, they will flush out to sort of be, you know, probably like this when they're fully grown, which is great. This is a rose I planted last year, and unfortunately, I didn't save the tag, and I don't remember what it is. I don't remember what color it is. I don't remember how tall it's gonna get. It looks a little odd because it's facing this way, because over the winter, this part of the rose all died from the cold, and so I had to cut it off. I had to prune it down. So depending on what this blooms as, I may end up moving it, because it's got to match my color scheme, and I'm sure it will. This is known as sedum, and this is really for my fall interest. This will turn into a beautiful sort of mauve-y pink starting in about late August, and it will extend all the way through the first frost, and it really is spectacular when everything else is sort of tired and done. And even for now, like I do think it's kind of cool to look at it. I don't know, to me it reminds me of like a Cabbage Patch Kid or something, which I don't know why I think that's cool, but I like it. Here again is another plant that I planted from a bare root rose. This is called a cream veranda, and when it actually flushes, it's not going to get very big. It gets about 2 feet high, so maybe there, and then 2 feet across, so like that. So it'll just be like a little basketball with hopefully these gorgeous creamy white flowers. We shall see. Behind it are some peonies that I planted, and I planted those, again, I planted them from tubers, which is a bit of a challenge, and it doesn't look to me like they're gonna bloom this year, which isn't necessarily odd. A lot of, like I was told, you should not expect blooms the first year, you should expect blooms the second year. I had my fingers crossed that I might be successful, but thinking that I might not, I actually went to the nursery. In addition to the tubers I bought some peonies that some professionals had grown, and I also stuck 1 or 2 in there. So we're gonna go around now, and I'm gonna show you the most beautiful peony bloom you've ever seen in your life, or at least that I've ever seen in my life, because it's in my garden. So I don't know if you can see this, but isn't that just absolutely gorgeous? This is called Bowl of Cream, and it kind of made my week when this guy bloomed, and it took him quite a while. He's been trying to bloom for at least 2 weeks, and every morning I come down to see, is he ready yet? And he finally did it this week, and I'm really proud of him. So this is the second half of the north-facing border in the backyard. And it's just really a repeat of the same flowers that we had in the bed that we just talked about, in a slightly different configuration. But the idea is to be repetitive because it adds some harmony. So again, we have our bearded irises. These are actually weeds, and they're grass. It's like an annual grass. I sprayed some grass begone, which is not supposed to hurt your plants. But as you can see, it did hurt some of the iris foliage, and it didn't particularly kill the grass. So I didn't want to put a second application. So for now, I'm just pretending that this is some sort of ornamental grass that I purposely planted, and honestly, I think it looks fine. Not perfect, but it's fine. Tucked in down there are 2 little roses called Kiss Me roses, also by Easy Elegance. Again, I planted those bare root, not quite ready to bloom yet. Maybe we'll do another garden tour in early July, and hopefully all of these roses will be in bloom, and that will be lovely. But unfortunately, there's not one garden tour where I can have my irises in bloom, and my roses in bloom, and my peonies in bloom, and my lupins in bloom, and my delphiniums in bloom. It just doesn't work that way. So roses will have to wait. I've got more phlox. This stuff is incredibly tall. Look at this. It's got to be 4 feet tall. I don't remember what color this is. I think it's going to be hot pink because I remember the ones down there were hot pink. So for that reason, I left it in. If it turns out to be some one that doesn't match my color scheme, I'm digging it out and it's going in my parents' garden, which is what I've done, just to be clear, with all of the plants that I've discarded. I bring them over to my parents because they have like a big open perennial bed that my mom never finished planting, and now I don't feel like I'm throwing away good plants.
Sounds like you just dump the crap you don't want on them.
I do, but my mom appreciates it because she doesn't care what color her plants are. She's happy to take yellow plants or orange plants or red plants. That works for her, and that's fine with me, as long as she doesn't have to plant them and I do the planting. So we have, again, this is a really pretty lupin. You can see how beautiful the purple is when it first comes in, unlike the ones that I showed you there. Those bloomed earlier because they get more sun, but they also die earlier because the sun is so harsh. But this tells you a little bit about the color. Okay, these were beautiful daffodils. There were daffodils there. I had some gorgeous tulips in there. All of them have since passed, but again, with the idea that you want to stagger your garden, the idea was I had some really lovely color here in April. Now, before we curve, and I'll show you this east-facing part of the garden, I want to show you a monstrosity because it's helpful to show that not everything is beautiful. This is a plant that you should never plant. There's actually 2 of them. There's that one right there, which I trimmed. It was 3 times that size last year. You couldn't even walk down this little pathway because that plant had grown over so much. This one last year was up probably halfway through those windows. I have tried to prune. I have been here with a Sawzall. I have done everything I can. I guess I should explain. These are called flowering quince, Q-U-I-N-C-E. They were popular in the 1960s. That's what I've understood. And I think these are older plants. They have thorns. They flower in the really early April. So there is color here when there isn't color a whole lot of other places, but they sucker. So for example, each one of these is not just the main plant. It's a new plant started, and they're everywhere, and you can't dig them out because their roots go so deep. So I actually have a guy coming over this week, and I'm gonna see if he can take this out for me, because I've done everything I could do, and I can't get it out. And I hate it, so we shall see. If he can't do it, I guess I'll just have to make my peace with it, but man, it is an ugly, awful plant. Don't plant flowering quince. Okay, so here we are on the east border. So the borders kind of go up, and then they end here. There is a stone wall which has got the original old stones, I believe, from 1823. I think at one point, what is now perennial beds was considered the dooryard, which was the place where they would keep chickens. They would tie up the horses. They would have their pigs feeding. And it was often the area that was right off of the kitchen, which I'm not showing you the inside of the house, but this is basically right behind the kitchen area. So here I have there's very little in bloom other than the bearded irises, which you've seen. This is much more of a summer place. I do have, and you can see that there are blooms throughout. These will be absolutely gorgeous white peonies. Not quite the same kind as the cream of, the bowl of cream peony that I just showed you. They're gonna have little yellow centers, but when they're in bloom, and I wish they were, but I guess they're not gonna be at the exact perfect time as the irises, they're really stunning because there are at least 50 of them. And so they're really lovely. This here, and all three of these, are hydrangea standards, which basically means they are a hydrangea that has been trained into this tree form. They're panicle hydrangeas, which means that when they bloom, they're going to have these really big, long pink blooms they're actually going to start white. They're going to fade to pink, and then they dry in like a really cool shape. And you can leave them on all winter because they kind of look cool with snow on them. So I planted 3 of them last year. I got them on sale at the very end of the season because when they're this way, they're very expensive. Like it's about $150 for one of these trees because they've been trained in this elaborate way. But I got them on sale, so that made me feel better. I've also planted 3 bare root roses these are David Austin, Claire Austin roses. They are not in flower yet, so not a whole lot to show you. And then you can see there's one here and one here. This is a mass of daylilies. Daylilies are absolutely gorgeous, but I don't know, again, what color these are going to be. I just know that they're daylilies from their foliage. If they're not the right color, another present for Mom. Okay, so this is sort of a shady area of the garden. I'm standing underneath a dogwood tree, and over there is a viburnum tree. A lot of these plants were already here. These large shrubs are obviously established plants, nothing that I bought in the last year. This guy, a rhododendron of some kind. This was a very similar looking white rhododendron. I don't know what varieties they are. In here is a lot of stuff that I have planted. I've planted big hostas. If you follow me in here a little bit, or maybe we'll talk about these other things. In here, there are 3 endless summer hydrangeas that I moved from the landscaping on the other side to be down here because if they bloom, wonderful. If they don't bloom, they still at least have some green foliage. So I think that's great. Or at least it's fine. I have some absolutely gorgeous, beautiful bleeding heart. This was here. And I'm so glad I kept it because when it was coming up in March, it looked absolutely like poison ivy. It had these sort of red, shiny leaves, and I was confident it was poison ivy, but I thought, you know what? It just seems a little early for poison ivy. I'm gonna let it go. And then it turned into this gorgeous thing. So I'm glad I waited. Back here is a Japanese marigold bush. It doesn't really have any blooms on it. I'm going to be taking that out and giving it to my mother because, again, I don't want things like bright yellow marigolds. I want everything to be pink and white and purple. We've got more sedum, which will be lovely. This here is another example of a plant you should never plant. It's periwinkle. It's called Vinca minor. And I think several owners ago, they were really into ground covers as opposed to mulching. And so they spread this throughout. And I can't tell you the back-breaking work that I have put in on these to pull out this Vinca. I left these two little bits because they're relatively contained, but it was everywhere. And it's not an easy plant to pull out. The roots go almost a foot deep. In order to get them out, you basically have to dig up a foot of soil and then just chuck it. So if you ever are in the mood for a ground cover, you think periwinkle would be a great idea, think again, don't do that to yourself. And now we are in the part of the garden that I previewed a little bit earlier, where I discussed the smooth hydrangeas that were in this garden and that were just so spectacular last year. So this whole drift that you can see here, these really big, beautiful leaves, turn into Annabelle hydrangeas. They are the size of maybe as big as a volleyball, each one of the blooms. And they are just spectacular. And all of them, like there's probably 150 blooms on these plants. And you cut them all the way back to nothing at the beginning of the season, and they get this big. I mean, once they're established. I suspect that they have probably been here for 20 years, and they're still doing great. And so that made me want to buy a little bit more smooth hydrangeas because they seem to perform so well. Again, we've got some geraniums just for some annual color so that there is some color over here before everything else comes into bloom. We've got phlox, waiting to see what the color is. I'm actually not sure what these little guys are. This was a ground cover, and these just came into bloom yesterday. So I have not had a chance to take some pictures and put them on my app to find out what they are. But these are just this one drift. They are nowhere near as terrible as the ground cover that I was just describing for you, that Vinca, the periwinkle. So maybe the next video, if we do one, I'll have some answers for you on what this guy was. But he saved me a little bit of mulching, so for that I'm grateful. Now there is one thing I want to show you. It's not garden related, but it is one of the coolest things about my house. And it is this stone. So when I first saw this house and I did my tour, I asked the realtor, what is this? She said, I don't know, it's probably like the well. And it's not the well, because if you look underneath it, it's just soil. And then I had some other contractors came over, they said, well, maybe it's a grave. I said, well, that doesn't really look like a grave, unless there was some like witch living here who wanted some strange marking on her gravestone. So it was very difficult to figure out what this was, because what search terms do you type into Google to say old stone with circle? Like, that's not any way to describe this. So it happened that I was looking, there's a beautiful historic village up in Massachusetts called Deerfield Village, and they've done massive restorations to really bring back the village, and it's on the way to the condo that we have in Vermont. So I was looking at the website because I wanted to find out when it was going to be open so I could go for a little tour. And they were discussing the renovation of this particular house that they were working on. And there was a picture of one of these. And I was like, oh my God, what is it? So what it is, it's called a lye stone. L-Y-E. Lye is the old-fashioned term for soap, although it's nothing like the soap we have now. Lye is so strong, I mean, it can burn the skin right off of you. What they would do, this normally would have been raised, and they would have taken ashes from the various fireplaces. They would have added to them some sort of an enzyme, and I'm blanking on what it was. And then they would let the enzyme work its way through the ashes, and it would create this liquid that would then, because you can imagine the bucket is right on top of where the circle is, the ashes and the little liquid that's created flows down here, and then it flows out this little circle, or out this little deposit, and then you put a bucket underneath it and you collect that lye, and then they would wait for it to harden. They'd break it into blocks, and that would be the lye that they would use that year. So I just think it's really neat, and we're going to talk about some other creepy things that are in this house, but this one's not creepy, this one's just cool. So it's one of the best things about having an old house, is like getting to find stuff like that. Okay, so as you can see here, we're on sort of like a long bank, and I consider this my hydrangea and hosta bank. We have here, this is my favorite kind of hosta, at least that I found so far. I always think of, it's called a Francis Williams hosta, and it's really, minus the bird droppings, it's really beautiful. It's got this blue center with this green exterior, which I really think is gorgeous. It gets to be about 4 feet wide. So once I just planted these this year. Once these become mature, which can take a few years, they actually probably should sort of meet in the middle underneath this inkberry holly. We've got some ferns back here. And then surrounding me and going all the way down are hydrangeas. These are not smooth hydrangeas. These are macrophylla hydrangeas, or mop top hydrangeas, depending on what you call them. About half of them are endless summer, and a couple of them are proven winners, like rhythmic blues. And they are all hydrangeas that are supposed to be reblooming hydrangeas, meaning that they should bloom on old wood or new wood. You don't cut them, you don't have to prune them at all. So unlike the smooth ones that you cut back, these ones you're not supposed to have to prune, except that you do have to prune. And that's the problem, because there is a lot of winter damage. I mean, I probably cut about half of the stems off of each of these in March, because the stems were just dead from the cold weather. So again, I'm not as big of a fan of these kind, although I do see that I have some buds, so maybe they'll surprise me. In any event, I do think that they are really nice here in a long line, and come July, August, if they do bloom, they should all bloom in a really lovely purple, like a deep purple color. So I think that'll be beautiful. Again, we've got some little hostas. These are hostas that I actually divided from, they were in a huge mass when I moved in, and they were kind of ungainly, so I watched a YouTube video on how to divide hostas, and I broke them all up so I could put them along this border. I wasn't sure if they were going to live, but they are living, and I think they look really good. I don't know the variety because I didn't buy them, but, you know, I feel like a proper, accomplished gardener for having divided them and doing a nice job. We can go fairly quickly through this. This is an old pig trough, and I just planted some begonias in there. I am not sure they're going to live because there's no drainage in that particular pig trough for obvious reasons. The pigs were supposed to be drinking water out of it. They didn't want it escaping, but that's kind of a no-no in terms of planting. Then I've just got some bushel baskets that I threw around here. Nothing grows underneath a maple like this because the roots are right here. Now I've covered a lot of them in mulch, but like they're everywhere and they're right at the surface. They do not grow deep, and so you can't get a shovel in here, and there's really very little nutrients for plants to take because the tree takes all of it. And in fact, I'm having a similar problem like that over here. This is a beautiful holly, so that seems to be okay. And then I have 2 roses. They were covered, I guess I should take a moment and explain that from this tree up, there were weeds when I moved in, but there was also a fair amount of plantings. And so some things like the phlox I showed you, the hydrangeas I showed you, the irises I showed you, those were there and I've kept them. I just cleaned up around them. From this tree down was nothing but brambles and vines, invasive vines, poison ivy, dead shrubs, trees that had dead branches everywhere. I mean, it was a mess. And I spent so much time in April with a sawzall and an axe, just and a shovel, just trying to clean this out. So a lot of what we're seeing here, and you'll see, is it's not as beautiful as up there because this is probably the first time that it's been planted in, I would say, 15 years. And I'm not sure what's even going to grow here. So some things I discovered underneath all the vines, and that's a good example. These are old rose bushes. I found them like underneath this giant invasive vine. You can see there's not much left to them. You know, like the vine had killed almost all of it except at the ends. But I'm hoping maybe this year with some TLC, it may come back. Back there, that's a corollary, and it was just riddled. I couldn't pull out the vines because they were so crazy. So I Googled it, like, what do I do? And people actually said for this particular shrub, you can cut it down to the ground and it will actually flush back in a more beautiful shape. So I cut it all the way down to the ground about 6 weeks ago, and it's really flushing back. So I'm actually very proud of that because, I mean, since I didn't plant it, I didn't really care if I killed it, but nice to know that I didn't. But as a good example of like stuff not growing, here are some impatiens. This is a perfect place for impatiens. There is dappled sun, but it's mostly shady. I've been giving them water and they are dead. This just may be a spot where like nothing grows. These begonias I only planted this week. Isn't that gorgeous? But they already look so tired and kind of pale and sickly. And I think there might be something poisonous or bad in the soil here. So I'm going to see what happens this year. And if nothing will grow here, then maybe next year I need to bring in like a big load of topsoil and just kind of like start over and compost and really good things to get out whatever the bad stuff is. Okay. All right, so this is just continuing down the kind of new area. What we have here are, these are roses, and they're some sort of a shrub rose. They're not your classic rose shape. They are all singles. I don't have pictures because they're not blooming yet, but they were here last year, but not in this spot. They were up where those hydrangea standards that I was telling you about were. And when I went to plant those hydrangea standards, I wanted to take these roses out because they were covered in black spot and powdery mildew, and they looked awful. And they were huge and full of thorns. These are incredibly thorny. And when I went to dig them out, whoever planted them in their nursery pots. Like they were still in their Proven Winners plastic pot. Somebody just dug a hole and stuck the pot in the ground. So that was interesting. So I thought, well, maybe that's why they're so horrible. And also that they weren't beautiful enough for up there. So I threw them back here and I pruned them down to almost nothing and took out a lot of the crossing branches, and I have little buds. So these are looking good and I'm happy about that. Intertwined here are all Supertunias because again, you got a lot of bang for your buck. They're just annuals. I didn't have, given the amount of area that I was landscaping this year, or trying to landscape, I don't have the budget to put in a new plant, a new perennial that will have the sort of thickness of the other borders throughout this entire area, nor do I quite have the expertise yet. So that's why I have a lot of annuals in here, because they're just going to add some color. I do want to show this. This is actually my neighbor's tree, but I'm so grateful to them for it. This is a snowball viburnum, and for anybody who has deer, and so you have a problem planting hydrangea because the deer love hydrangea. Deer hate viburnums, and this has been like this for 3 weeks, and I just think it's beautiful, and it's everywhere, and I think I probably am going to the extent that I put in some more big shrubs, I may really look to put in some more viburnums because I just think that's gorgeous. We've got another Regalia, the wine and roses kind. This is what I had in the front. This was just planted this year, so it's not quite as large as the other ones. But let me give you an example. This entire area was filled with that periwinkle that I was discussing. And like I said, I was out here pretty much dug out a foot of soil all the way across and then brought in some planting soil. It's still not even because I didn't do a good job because I got lazy. But even that, like you can still see, the roots are just coming through. And I mean, it's 1,000 times better than it was, but they are everywhere. And again, I know I already said it, do not plant periwinkle. These are beautiful azaleas. They bloomed first thing in like middle of April. before they even leafed out, they bloomed. And they were a deep, like a purple that is a purple pink that is hard to describe, but they were stunning. I mean, there was no other color here, especially like that deep color, anywhere back here. And I mean, you couldn't take your eyes off them. So I was really proud of them. The reason that they look a little sad and very thin is because the invasive vine, it's called Oriental Bittersweet, and it's a horrid thing that could have actually been planted here purposefully, because in the late 1800s, people thought that it was a beautiful species and it spread really well and all of these things. And so they planted it everywhere, and now it has taken over. And it's an awful plant. What it does is it comes out of the ground. First of all, it spreads everywhere. It's got these orange roots. And then it winds itself up all the branches and chokes them. So it's like a snake, like a python, and it just squeezes them until they die. And so I had to prune out tons and tons and tons of dead wood out of these poor azaleas. And so this is what's left. But I'm glad I got it, and they've still got some life in them, so that's good. But same thing here with this tree. As you can see, there's no branches until about here, and that's because all the lower branches were all dead. From the Oriental Bittersweet. In here, I have planted 3 David Austin roses, again from bare root. They're not in bloom yet. These are the basketballs. They're going to be hot pink, which I'm thrilled about. This is salvia. It needs to be cut back. The only reason I cut back all the rest of it, so I haven't talked about this yet. It's supposed to be an amazing companion plant for roses, but I don't really understand how that can be, because this bloomed in the spring and that's going to bloom in the summer. So maybe when these are more established, I'll understand why people say to plant salvia. But in any event, all of these spikes were this deep purple. And as you can tell, I really like spiky purple plants. And the bees were everywhere. Like, amazing for pollinators, to the extent that you care about having pollinators in your garden. These were fantastic. And they really were beautiful. And they're perennial. So I'm going to cut them back. And then there's a chance that probably midsummer, I may get like a little bit more of a rebloom, but they won't be as big as this. Behind me, all these little green guys, these are Angelonia. They are also tall spikes in purple, and I planted them because they are not, as you can see, they haven't really bloomed. They are supposed to bloom in July and August, and so I figured once the salvia is cut back, I could bring those back, and that they would still be a spiky blue flower behind what I'm hoping is a hot pink rose. Okay. Here we have a rhododendron bush. This was here. This is my first and only bloom, but it's a lovely purple. So, cool, we'll keep her. Okay, and here we are at the final section of the perennial beds. And this is actually the most difficult section that I've worked on. The Oriental Bittersweet here was out of control. I ended up having to cut down an entire tree because growing within the roots of the tree were actual stalks of bittersweet, which you would think is a vine. But this bittersweet was so established that it truly looked like its own tree, because the circumference was probably, like this big. And the tree was just dead because it had been basically sucked alive. So I cut him down, and then in general in here, I mean, the vines were everywhere, and it was really difficult to get everything pulled up. To make matters worse, that tree right there is a tree called a Norway maple. And as you can see, nothing grows underneath a Norway maple. The green that you see, that's not even real weeds. Those are little tiny Norway maple seedlings from the little maple. I used to call them pinwheels. I don't know what their actual name is. But anyway, just drop them after I mulch them. And they're already setting seed into these little baby seedlings. So I'm gonna have to pull these out. This is a terrible tree. They don't sell it in nurseries anymore. It's on the list of invasive plants in Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York. It's a felony, or I don't know if it's a felony, but it's a crime to sell it. And it was purposely planted, I'm sure, because back when Dutch elm disease devastated all the elms, throughout the country, people planted Norway maples because they grow really, really fast, not understanding that in fact they were going to become such an invasive plant, and they really are. I mean, I have pulled up so many seedlings just trying to keep this guy under control. So for now, I'm leaving him because he's established and he's been here, but if he keeps giving me trouble, he may end up getting pulled out. And of course, I would not just pull him out and put nothing in its place. I would put in a true maple, a sugar maple, a proper maple that is native to this area and that is actually like good for the environment.
I would do what I do with all my rejects. I'd bring it to mom.
Yeah. So this area is a little bit of what I would say the exception to my planting color scheme, which is, as I've now said 100 times, is purple, pink, and white. The thing was, I kept going to nurseries and I'm unable to resist an apricot colored flower. I just think they're so beautiful, like peach. And I was on websites and I was looking at these roses and they had these gorgeous apricot colors and I wanted them. So I thought, well, I'll just hide them down here. And this will be my little section where I put all the apricot colors, which is basically pink. And so I have here, I just planted this guy. I didn't plant him from bare root, which is probably why he's already blooming. This is an At Last rose. It's by Proven Winners. It's kind of like the Endless Summer in the sense that it's supposed to be really easy to plant, but I think it's not quite McDonald's. I'd say it's more like the Applebee's. I'm just kidding. But it doesn't have disease. You don't need to deadhead, but I am going to deadhead. It's supposed to bloom all the time. And I mean, the amount of buds, there's probably 50 buds on here right now. They just haven't quite bloomed. And I should also say, the fact that it's blooming at all is pretty amazing because roses need sun. And I put it underneath a Norway maple because when I planted this guy a month ago, this Norway maple wasn't quite as flushed out. And so I thought I was planting it in sun. I also have begonias here. These are begonias. And then this is verbena. So these are all annuals, just to kind of give some color. This is a Roald Dahl rose, as in the author. It's another David Austin rose that I planted bare root. And it is going to have beautiful sort of apricot, the reason it's called the Roald Dahl rose is because the blossoms are the same color as a peach. And as you know, Roald Dahl's famous book is James and the Giant Peach. And so that's why it's called the Roald Dahl rose. So I have two of those here. And then finally, over here, we've got Lady Emma Hamilton, which I don't know how much you guys are English history buffs, but Lady Emma Hamilton was a famous prostitute who ended up Lord Nelson around the turn of the century, maybe earlier, maybe in like the mid 1800s. I don't know the exact timing. Fell in love with her, and he married her to the scandal of society. And she was considered at one point the most beautiful woman in the world. So a little bit of like a Scarlett O'Hara type, because she was also very controversial. And unclear to me why this guy's named Lady Emma Hamilton, or she is named Lady Emma Hamilton. But when she blooms, I'm hoping that she is also the most beautiful rose in the world. We've got some more salvia that needs to be cut back. This is a Pinky Winky regular. I had told you guys about how I had those hydrangea standards that were panicle hydrangeas. The name for them was Pinky Winky. This is a regular Pinky Winky. It's going to get really big. It'll probably get to be about 6 feet tall, so taller than me, and 5 feet wide. So it's really going to take up this whole space. Back here are some plants that are going to go to my mom's house. These are called Euonymus, and I thought they were really beautiful. I love the variegated foliage, but then I read that they're actually invasive. I'm not sure I believe that for two reasons. One, why are they still selling them at my local nursery, which is like a very smart, nice nursery? And two, invasive plants are plants that you see everywhere. I have never seen like this beautiful shrub just like popping up all over the highways. So that suggests to me like maybe they're not invasive, but I'd rather have it be my parents' problem than my problem. So I'm gonna dig them out and bring them over there, and it can line their fence as opposed to mine. And I'll figure out something else to put back here, maybe like a beautiful evergreen or something. These stay evergreen, they stay green, they don't drop their leaves. And that was what I was going for, which is why I planted them without doing my research. And that's I guess just a story to say. You should do your research before you buy anything. And I think we are at the conclusion of this particular tour. We may do a few little shots just to show you the property. And thank you so much for watching. This may have been very boring. Oh no, we're not quite done. We have a few roses that are in bloom, and I do want to show them to you because they are very gorgeous. So let's just quickly do that, and then I'll say goodbyes. Okay, we're at the very end. This is actually the border that is closest to the house. When I moved in last year, except for this flowering quince, which I've already discussed is a disaster, there were a couple of other really overgrown shrubs, which I pulled out and I was able to pull out myself. And then it was an herb garden. And since I don't like vegetables and I have no use for herbs, I pulled all of that out because I didn't want it. And instead, I have tried to do same color scheme as discussed before. This is an example of a bed that really hasn't quite come into its own yet. This is a rose, it's a David Austin, it's a Gertrude Jekyll. And Gertrude Jekyll was like the first female landscape designer. She's the one that really came up with the idea of perennial borders and planting in beautiful drifts of color, as opposed to just like hodgepodge or just having like boxwoods and topiaries. So she's very famous, and so they named this rose after her. And it's going to become a massive hot pink rose. The reason I gave it so much space versus some of the other roses we talked about is because it's known for having octopus arms, where it just kind of sticks out in wild directions, but also has really beautiful flowers. So we're gonna see what happens. These were salvias, which I've cut back. In front of us are hardy geraniums. That's actually what a true geranium looks like. The ones that you plant in your window boxes, and which I planted in those pots that I showed you before, those are called zonal geraniums. But for example, in my book of Monet's plants to bring things full circle, they talk a lot about the geranium beds. And I remember when I was looking at the garden, I was like, I don't see a geranium anywhere. Where are they? And that's because I had never known until then that a true geranium looks like this. These are delphiniums. There are 5 of them here, and I'm going to continue to buy more and put them, as soon as I know how big Gertrude here is going to get, I'm going to plant this whole area with delphiniums because I just think they're gorgeous, and this one is just getting started. The other ones haven't bloomed. But again, I've obviously got a thing for tall, spiky purple flowers. These come in both pink and a blue and white and a deep purple. So that'll be something that I add to over the years. And I probably put them in other places as well, but they like a lot of sun, but they also need protection from the wind because they get very tall, and so the wind can blow them over. And this particular garden, the wind blows right off the river and it whips up through this little area. And so a plant like this really needs to be planted behind something tall and a shrub. And so that's why we've done it here. When I take this guy out, I'll probably replace it with something like a dwarf Alberta spruce or something that's evergreen and that gets about 6 feet tall, so that these guys still have their protection and so that there's a little bit of winter interest in this bed. So just to continue walking, as you can see, I have lining the path here, geraniums. These guys are actually a ton of work because they are virtually planted on like an inch of soil. And so the water like evaporates immediately. So even on days when it's rained, like if it's rained in the morning, they kind of look a little droopy by 6 o'clock and I have to come out here and water again. But I just think it's really nice to have this little color along the walkway. Supertunia vistas, which get even more enormous than some of the other supertunias I've talked about. I suspect by the end of the summer that all 3 of these, and maybe even that one, will be one massive mound. It will just look like one plant, when in fact it's 4. And that's, again, a great deal because these are $5 each. And this is the fuchsia color, which I thought was a pretty good combination with those geraniums. Not perfect, but close enough. And here is another rose that I planted this year. I didn't plant it bare root, which is why it's already in bloom, and it's called Bonica. And I planted 2 of them. Unclear to me why this one is in bloom and that, like so much bloom and that one isn't. But it's just a really lovely rose, very, very easy to take care of. I haven't had any issues with black spot or anything, even though it's been really wet. So I'm pretty pleased about that. And I just think it's lovely. I mean, it's not your classic rose with sort of like the double petals. Like it looks, it's not as dramatic as that, but I just think that the color is really, really lovely. So to continue down, we have a boxwood here. This is a European boxwood, like the ones I talked about on the other side of the house. I'm gonna wait until it gets a little bit taller, and then I'm gonna shape it into like a nice dome. But for now, I just wanna let it grow. And then I have here 2 hybrid teas and hybrid tea roses. And the actual, these were very, very popular until like the 90s.
Start that one again.
Yeah.
Just because I tripped on a brick.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So, and now we are here at the hybrid teas. I have 3 of them. The other one that I have is the one that I planted last year, and I don't remember what it is. I'm in a similar boat with this guy. I planted him, and I don't remember what color he is. And he doesn't actually have any blooms on him, which is unfortunate. Now, hybrid teas are absolutely gorgeous. As you can see, this one is in bloom. She's been in bloom. Her name is Queen Elizabeth, and she's been in bloom for 4 or 5 days. And so when she's big and kind of at the end of her life, she looks like this. When she's new, she looks like this, which I just think is lovely. And when she's kind of in the middle, she looks like this. Now, the problem with hybrid teas, and the reason that a lot of people don't plant them, is because they get terrible diseases. They are not disease resistant at all. And that's one thing if you live in an area that's very dry. But if you live in the Northeast, which is super humid, it's supposed to be really challenging. I've been spraying like antifungals on a weekly basis. And as you can see, I mean, it's a little bit, there's still little black spots everywhere. It was actually way worse earlier this week because we had like 4 days of rain and there was tons of yellow. And every time you have yellow and it drops, you got to pick it up, because if it drops and then it rains and the rain splashes off the diseased ones, it spreads like wildfire. And the problem isn't just that the leaves get little black spots on them. They then drop off once they have that problem. And so sometimes by the end of the season, if you get it really bad, your rose doesn't have any leaves on it. So a lot of people don't plant these anymore, but I bought these last year and I planted them before I knew what I was doing or had done any research, because I just thought they were pretty. And I don't know, I'll keep them until they drive me crazy. And I'm interested to find out what this one turns into. So with that beautiful rose as our last plant, I want to just say thank you for watching me on this crazy long journey of flowers. And I don't know if you learned anything, but at least you got to see my house and you got to see what I've spent COVID-19's self-isolation period doing. And maybe we'll do this again when all of my roses actually have some blooms on them. Thanks so much.